So, Keys to Change is a virtual conversation series where we sit down with local leaders and change makers to talk honestly about housing development and the future of our community. The goal of the series is to simply create a space for real dialogue about what's working, what isn't, and how we can build more inclusive, affordable, and thriving neighborhoods across Maryland. I'm your host, Kobe Smith, a realtor with Maryland, in Maryland and DC, and founder of Chateau Seekers at Keller Properties. And today I'm honored to be joined by Andrew Friedson, our representative in Montgomery County District 1. He serves as chair of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee and is currently running for county executive. Councilmember Friedson has been a leading voice in housing, economic growth, and smart development, working to balance affordability, physical responsibility, and long-term community planning. Today, we will be discussing Montgomery County housing challenges with what it will take to increase supply and affordability and how we can build communities that are both accessible and sustainable for the future. Councilmember Friedson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Of
Great to be
course.
here.
So, pretty much our first question is, what made you want to get into public service, and how has your perspective changed since being on the council?
It's such an important question. Thanks for having me and for lifting up these issues, which are so important to our community and to our future. I think of public service not as a career choice, but as a calling. It's something where I have been dedicated and interested in it my entire life, really. It started when I was really young. I used to volunteer with my mom and my family at local community-based organizations, our synagogue, at a local homeless shelter, in places all around Montgomery County where I grew up. And I used to go with my parents to vote every single election. And so it's just something that interested me. I didn't come from a political family, though. And
Mhm.
really, my interest in that side of things started, frankly, in fifth grade when I realized we were taking a bus route that wasn't safe, that none of the
Mhm.
parents that I knew would make the left turn onto a main road that our bus did. And so I tried to set up a meeting with our principal. I was 10. Principal did not have much interest in meeting with
Mhm.
me to get told
Discuss
what the
bus
bus
routes.
routes should be. And ultimately, I was not able to convince her to change the bus routes, and our bus crashed on that left turn
Mhm.
not long after I had cornered her in the hallway and stated my case. And, it really spoke to me as see something, say something. If you
Mhm.
see a problem, you need to speak up about it. Doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, what role you're serving in. It's our responsibility. And that, in many ways, became my North Star. There was a little article about that crash that came out in the local newspaper. I cut it out, I pinned it to my cork board
Mhm.
in my childhood bedroom. That became really my North Star. And I, then got involved in student government the next year in sixth grade. I ran
There you
for
go.
treasurer of my middle school, and then I was vice president and then student body president of my middle school, and became student body president of my high school, Churchill High School, and then went to University of Maryland and got involved and became student body president and was elected by my uh, colleagues and peers as student body president of University of Maryland,
Mhm.
and got active in politics and in policymaking at the state level, at the federal level, but really never lost my tie and my connection to the local level. And
Mhm.
after a period of time, nearly a decade, working in a variety of different roles at the state level, doing fiscal, economic, and tax policy work, scrutinizing billions of dollars of contracts, holding government agencies accountable, being an administrator and overseeing the restructuring of a large financial agency and launching a disability savings plan statewide. I miss the local connection. I miss being an
Mhm.
advocate. I was an advisor to elected officials statewide. I was an administrator of large government programs, but I missed being an advocate for my community, the place where I was born and raised, the only place I've ever called home. And I decided to run for the county council in 2018. And many of the issues that I ran on housing affordability, on the lack of growth in our economy and in wages not keeping pace with the cost of living, those have only gotten more challenging over the last 8 years. And so I'm running for county executive in many ways for the same reasons why I ran for county council. We've been able to get a lot accomplished and get a lot done as a council member, but there's a lot more I think we need to do, and a lot more I believe I can do by bringing people together and delivering on the issues that actually matter to them. And that's why I'm running for county executive.
hmm So you mentioned growing up in Maryland, growing up in Montgomery County. You mentioned that one of the things you ran on originally was housing. So Montgomery County and Maryland at whole has a housing shortage. What do we need to do right now to build more housing?
The only way to solve the housing crisis that we face, which is overwhelmingly a supply and demand issue, is to
hmm
build more housing. I have been the leading champion at the county to create more affordable housing, create creative financing opportunities and different programs to subsidize affordable housing. The Housing Production Fund, for instance, which I spearheaded and championed, is now a national model for how state and local
hmm
government should be tackling this crisis. The Nonprofit Preservation Fund, the working with nonprofit organizations to build housing and streamlining the process to build housing, and working with faith-based institutions to build affordable housing, and co-locating housing on publicly owned land and at metros. But none of it works. None of it happens unless we are actually building more housing and are solving the broader market. And so we need to do both. And ultimately, the only way to do that is to make it easier, cheaper, and faster to build more housing. We've lost
hmm
26,000 middle income residents in Montgomery County, overwhelmingly
hmm
because of a lack of housing options that are affordable and because of a lack of job opportunities to pay for the cost of living and the cost of housing in Montgomery County. We have to be relentlessly focused on that. We have to be making it much easier, much faster to be able to build housing. And we can't rely on tax increases every year to solve every problem because it's only making it more expensive to
hmm
build and to live here. And you can't make Montgomery County more affordable by making it more expensive. And that's why I've been the leading champion pushing back against tax increases as the first resort, as
hmm
the major solution to solve our challenges, because it's not a solution that is sustainable to help us grow an economy, to keep up with our way of life and our quality of life and the level of services and support for vulnerable people that we have come to expect and I believe we deserve in Montgomery County.
hmm So I'm from Maryland too. I'm a Gen Zer. I went to Calvert Hall and then ended up going to play hockey elsewhere, but came back to Maryland. A lot of the friends I went to high school with, grew up with, are young professionals like me, and they're seeing that affordability is an issue for us, for us young people. And a lot of us want to live here, but can't afford it. So how can we make housing more attainable for us young professionals?
Well, I've led the effort on a workforce housing
hmm
initiative, which is one way to do it, to make housing available to people who are making it about 75,000 a person, 150,000 a couple. That's really the heart and soul of the type of folks that we used to be able to attract to Montgomery County, who are now completely priced out of the market, where
hmm
subsidized affordable housing is out of their reach because they make a little bit too much for that. And yet, market rate housing, where the average detached single family home in Montgomery County is now $1 million,
hmm
is out of reach as well. If you can't afford $1 million+ home and you don't qualify for subsidized affordable housing programs, you are priced out of the market in Montgomery County right now. We have to solve that issue.
hmm
So some of that is to make housing more affordable. Some of that is to create more job opportunities for young people in Montgomery County. But a big part of that is making sure that we have more housing options for more people in more places. And I have been focused relentlessly on those issues because we need more options. We need to create more opportunities for young people to be able to live.
Okay. So how can we build more housing near transit and in walkable areas without losing what people love about the community, like we have in downtown Bethesda?
Well, Change is inevitable. The
Hmm.
question is, how do you manage that change? So the idea that we could keep things exactly as they were when my parents grew up here, or when I grew up here, is not an option. That is not on the table. The question is how we are going to change and whether or not we are going to be more inclusive and create more opportunities in the change that is inevitably occurring. A good example of that is uh, building near transit.
Hmm.
Ultimately, we are going to see growth near transit. The question is, what kind of growth are we going to see? I happen to believe that we should see growth on the actual metro stations themselves.
Hmm.
That's why I've incentivized building high-rise housing and communities on metro-owned property. We were
Hmm.
historically getting zero property taxes and zero housing out of these surface parking lots. And now we're seeing opportunities where we're actually going to get housing, we're going to get tax revenue, and we're going to get vibrant communities as well. And so that's one way to do it. You need to grow, and you need to manage that growth, and having the growth be as close to transit and to jobs and to amenities as possible helps to mitigate some of the infrastructure demands. And then the other dynamic is to make sure that we're creating more housing options near transit. That includes creating opportunities for things like duplexes and townhomes in
Hmm.
areas that are walking distance to transit. Historically, we have not created a lot of opportunities for that. I have been trying to lead efforts to create thoughtful ways in which we can provide those options and those opportunities. Overwhelmingly, smaller homes
Hmm.
are cheaper. And so providing options for smaller homes and different options between a condo and a multifamily rental and a large single family home creates housing options for people. And if we can do them, particularly young people and older people, actually, and if you can do that in close proximity to transit, you've created a lot of the benefits and mitigated some of the challenges and some of the costs. The last thing I'll say about this is
Hmm.
uh, there's this idea of housing has to pay for infrastructure, but that misses the point that housing is economic infrastructure.
Hmm.
We need housing to support the economy. Now, you can't have housing without jobs, but you're not going to have jobs if you don't have housing that's
Hmm.
affordable to the people who want to take the jobs.
Hmm.
And overwhelmingly, in every economic report from the comptroller, the governor, from academic institutions, from business groups, everybody has been saying similar things, which is that housing affordability is an economic problem, just like childcare is. And if we don't address that as an infrastructure issue economically, then we are going to continue down the path that we've been on, which is a less and less affordable and less economically competitive place, which we can't sustain and
Hmm.
keep up with the high quality of life that we have come to expect in Montgomery County.
I agree. So, what can the county do to work better with developers and builders to lower the cost of building so that we can attain maybe more affordable housing and more development?
Yeah, there's room to do more, but I've done quite a bit on this. We created an Accelerate MoCo initiative, which reduced the timeline that it takes to build things in Montgomery County by 75%. We have to make it easier, cheaper, and faster to build. I want to overhaul the permitting system, which is way too cumbersome and too difficult. But just to give you an example, for an affordable housing project, prior to the Accelerate MoCo initiative that I spearheaded, uh, an organization that was building multifamily housing, it took them over 1,500 days to go through the process, which is insane. After the process that we established through the initiative that I led, it took them 64 days to go through the process. Same
Mhm.
process.
Mhm.
We didn't eliminate any environmental requirements like
Mhm.
stormwater requirements and tree canopy. We didn't get rid of any public input. We just made the government more accountable,
Mhm.
and we made the government more responsive, and we created a much more streamlined process.
Mhm.
We can solve these problems. We can make it easier. We can make it cheaper. We can make it faster to do these things. And time is money. Just to give you a sense, one of the housing projects that was done before this new program. I asked them what it would have meant if they had our process in terms of dollars and cents for
Mhm.
their affordable housing community that they built in Forest Glen.
Mhm.
They told me $8 million. $8 million in lost money. That money could have
Mhm.
gone to a nonprofit that was providing affordable housing to
Mhm.
provide more affordable housing, more deeply affordable housing, or honestly could have been the seed funding for the
Mhm.
entire next project. That could
Mhm.
have been the gap financing that made another affordable housing community possible.
Mhm.
But instead, because of the bureaucratic red tape that we hadn't figured out at that point, we lost $8 million. We lost housing. We lost time. We probably lost residents who were priced out of the market and will never move back here.
Mhm.
And that is something that we have to change, and the time is now to change it.
Mhm. So, how can we better support first-time buyers trying to break into an expensive area like Bethesda or Chevy Chase or Rockville?
Yeah, well, the first thing we have to do is stop making it more expensive to
Mhm.
live here. One of the reasons why housing has gotten so expensive is that we haven't allowed for enough of it to be built. So we need to make more housing available. That helps to prevent the, 8, 9, 10, potential purchasers, in a
Mhm.
bidding war and, houses going for, X% above asking price and, the price wars that just completely price most young people out of many markets, particularly the most expensive and most competitive markets that we have in Montgomery County, number one. Number two, we've got to stop raising property taxes every single year to solve every single problem. I have been banging the drum and leading the opposition against that approach. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think it's fair to residents, and it's not going to allow us to grow in the way that we need. As I mentioned earlier, we lost 26,000 middle income residents. Overwhelmingly, those were young people
Mhm.
who either moved away when they needed to expand their housing. They went from a
Mhm.
one bedroom and needed a two or three bedroom, or they went from a one or two bedroom and needed a townhome or a single family home to support a growing family. They were priced out of the market, didn't see the job opportunities, the housing availability that they needed, and so they moved
Mhm.
away. They moved to Frederick, they moved to Anne Arundel County, they moved to Virginia, they moved out of the region. We
Mhm.
need to keep them. That is the lifeblood of Montgomery County, and we've got to keep them here and building more housing and making sure that we're not raising taxes every year to make that housing more expensive is a key part of it. And then we do have targeted programs that would help. One of
Mhm.
them is the first-time home buyer credit programs that we have provided with first-time homebuyer support. I have championed the doubling of that program
Mhm.
already once, and I think we need to double it again. The funds are expended halfway through the year.
Mhm.
They were expended halfway through the year. We doubled it, which I pushed hard for colleagues to support, which they did.
Mhm.
And then they're still expended halfway through the year. What does that mean? The demand is even larger than two times what we currently have. It's just that once the funds are expanded, people stop requesting because they know that there's no
Mhm.
more money until July 1st. So they stop. We've called for a doubling of that program again. I think we need to increase the funding for it, but ultimately, that's the subsidy to support some. What we need is the affordability to support all, and my goal is to do both.
Okay. So, how do we make affordable housing something that communities support instead of push back on?
Well, I think we're starting to see a change in that dynamic. When I joined the council, if
Mhm.
people had said Andrew would lead the effort to eliminate the housing moratorium countywide,
Mhm.
and after a few years, even though it's controversial, people won't even really be talking about it, and everybody will suggest that it was the right move.
Mhm.
Uh, People would have thought you were crazy in
Mhm.
2018 for that. This was considered a third rail of housing politics.
Mhm.
And today that has changed. People realize that uh, you were denying housing that we needed and school funding that we needed.
Mhm.
And ultimately, we've eliminated that policy. Now, there is a general acceptance of affordable housing in communities across the county. I don't think
Mhm.
that there's much debate and dispute over that. Now, it's really a question of the practicality of how we balance affordable housing with the need for more housing. You can't
Mhm.
just subsidize housing. If housing isn't going to be built, you have to facilitate housing to be built and then make
Mhm.
sure that we subsidize some of it to be affordable. But we need all of it. And that is really how the conversation has changed. You still do get some elements of folks who would love affordable housing, just nowhere near them.
Mhm.
And we need to, continue to call that out and to push back against that. That we all need to be part of these efforts when it comes to housing, and also that we need to marry our rhetoric with our reality,
Mhm.
and our values with our actions. If
Mhm.
you say we're a welcoming and inclusive community, then we should have policies that reflect that. If you are talking about immigration at the federal level and say that we want to be a welcoming place
Mhm.
that is an Abrahamian tent, so to speak, from
Mhm.
a biblical reference that is open on all sides as a
Mhm.
value, then we should view our version of immigration, which is housing policy at the local level, in a similar vein, that we welcome
Mhm.
folks here, that we don't want to have a country club mentality, that those of us who are here, put up a moat and make it impossible for new people to be part of our exclusive club. I don't want our
Mhm.
club to be exclusive.
Mhm.
I want our club to be inclusive. I want it to be a community and not a club.
Mhm.
And ultimately, you're starting to see the narrative on that changing a little, but we need to make sure that we continue to push in that direction.
Okay. So, how do you balance making housing more affordable while still protecting the county's budget and infrastructure?
Well, again, I mentioned this earlier. We
Mhm.
have to view housing as economic infrastructure in and of
Mhm.
itself. And I think there has been a narrative that is an anti growth, anti housing narrative that housing has to pay not only for its own impacts, but has to
Mhm.
pay for the impacts that it has on other people. That if you want to be part of my club,
Mhm.
then you have to pay a higher initiation fee than I paid because I'm already a member here.
Mhm.
And I, again, think that we should be building communities, not clubs, that it should
Mhm.
be inclusive, not exclusive. And that ultimately, having more residents and attracting more people will solve these issues, will not exacerbate these issues. Although that has been the prevailing narrative for many, many years, not just in Montgomery
Mhm.
County, but all over the country in terms of an anti housing, anti growth agenda.
Mhm.
It has been this suggestion that unless you are paying more than your fair share, then you shouldn't be able to come here, that I should have a veto over the next resident coming to be my neighbor.
Mhm.
Whether, I should not only have the rights of my own property, but I should have control of what happens around my property
Mhm.
as well on areas that I don't own. I should be able to control what my neighbor does and what I do. And
Mhm.
I just think we have to, have a more community-based mindset on those issues. Here's the bottom line in Montgomery County. The over 60 population is growing 4 times faster than the under 60 population. That is completely unsustainable. That is
Mhm.
largely a function of the lack of economic vibrancy and job creation and a lack of affordability of housing.
Mhm.
We have to solve that problem, where the only options that we'll be left with are paying higher taxes for those of us who are still here just to maintain the current level of services and quality of life,
Mhm.
or a massive deterioration of the services that we've come to expect and I believe we deserve. I don't think either of those are acceptable. The only other option is to attract new residents
Mhm.
and to have new people coming to Montgomery County. Growing is a benefit to all of us, and we have to
Mhm.
view it that way. That's how you fund schools and transportation and infrastructure. You have to do it in a smart way, in a thoughtful way, in a reasonable way. But ultimately, there is no option to fund infrastructure in a way that doesn't include growth. It's
Mhm.
impossible and it won't happen. And we need to make sure that we remind people of that.
hmm Okay, so my last question before I open it up. Looking ahead 10 years, what do you want housing in Montgomery County to look like?
I want to make sure that every person and family in Montgomery County
hmm
have housing options that work for them at that stage of their life. I want to make
hmm
sure that young people can access our community,
hmm
and I want to make sure that older people can afford to stay in our community and that the needs of our families, as well as our young workers and as well as our older adults, are being served. And in addition to that, I want to live in a community where we have mixed income communities throughout Montgomery County,
hmm
where people can live where they serve,
hmm
whether they're a public employee, whether they're a first responder, whether they're a teacher or a nurse, or whether they work in the service sector in the private sector.
hmm
I think you should be able to live near where you work. And I think we need housing options that are affordable and transportation connections that are manageable and efficient and effective that facilitate that type of community. To me, that's the place where I want to live. And I think that's the place that would be best for all of us to live.
hmm So, Councilmember Friedson, thank you again for taking the time to join us and share your perspective. These conversations matter because housing impacts every aspect of our lives. Now I'd like to open the floor to our audience. If you have a question, please drop it in the chat and I'll select up to three questions and ask them directly before we close. So I already see one. So Tammy said, I am concerned about the number of smaller homes and bungalows being raised to make way for 5,000 plus square feet foot homes in and around my neighborhood. Starter homes, yards for kids, and mature trees are being lost at an alarming rate. This practice flies in the face of the need for affordable housing, climate changes, and quality of life issues. What can be done about the loss of these smaller homes?
Yeah, this is a great question and a great point. This really speaks to my point that I made earlier that change is inevitable. So doing nothing is not an option if you want to maintain the status quo, because the status quo is not static.
Mhm,
It is changing too. And the question is whether or not that change is acceptable to you. So, a perfect example of the status quo is by virtue of the fact that the only option that you have in an older home in certain areas of the county is to knock it down and build a much more expensive, massive house. This is the McMansionization challenge. That's why creating more housing options in certain places, particularly along the corridors, was something that I thought was really important because that allows for a different option rather than tearing down a house and replacing it with one massive single family house. Now, in
mhm,
certain places of the county, you have the option to build a duplex. You have the option to do other options that will serve more families, that will provide an entry point to more people. I think that's important. I don't think it requires, I know it doesn't require anybody to do anything, but it gives an option so that you're not requiring one choice and facilitating an outcome that people increasingly are frustrated by and don't like. Change is hard, but ultimately, I think change is inevitable. The question is, do we fight it, do we ignore it, or do we embrace it? And then how do we facilitate it in a way that serves our broader needs? And ultimately, that's a way to address that.
mhm. So another question is, it would seem that the empty space that was White Flint Mall would be a perfect space for denser, affordable housing. What's happening there, if you know?
At White Flint Mall?
Yeah, what's happening at White Flint Mall, pretty much.
Yeah,
That's what
White
she's
Flint Mall
asking.
is a privately held property. There were big plans for it as part of the White Flint sector plan. Ultimately, between the economic dynamics and the interests of the property owner, those plans didn't move forward. I am hopeful that ultimately, with some uh, public-private partnership potentially, and with different leadership at the county, that we might see something move forward on that White Flint property. I think there's tremendous opportunity there. It is a critical property in the center of the county along a major corridor. In terms of Rockville Pike, it's a significant east-west connection, mid-county connection there as well. And we need White Flint to reach its full potential, and we need it to be a place that has jobs, that has housing, and that creates a positive revenue stream for our county. And ultimately, it's going to require leadership in order to have that, and it's going to require partnership in order to make that happen. And I am hopeful that the next county executive will be able to facilitate that.
Mhm. So, we truly appreciate everyone who joined us today. If you found this conversation valuable, the full recording will be shared on YouTube and on Instagram as part of the Key to Change series. And before we wrap up, I also want to invite everyone to an upcoming event that I'm hosting, a real estate seminar and wine tasting, where you'll get hands-on experience building your home buying plan, defining what you're looking for, and starting your pre-approval process all in one session. If you're interested in learning more, I'll drop the link in the chat and include it in the follow-up email. Councilmember Friedson, thank you again for your leadership and for joining us. And thank you all.
Thank you so much. Take care. Appreciate you,
Mhm.
Kobe.